In the heart of New York City, James Rogers' life is torn apart by betrayal and loss as his perfect world crumbles in an instant. His wife, Emily, breaks a sacred trust, leaving him alone to face pain and emptiness. Shattered but not broken, James embarks on a journey of self-discovery and healing to reclaim control of his destiny. His struggle becomes an epic odyssey, where every tear and heartbeat becomes a step toward rebirth. James Rogers had always believed that his life was under control, just like the eternal rhythm of the metropolis in which he lived. New York, with its endless stream of lights and noise of the streets, served as the personification of opportunity and hope for him. However, behind the glitter of skyscrapers there was an inner darkness that he had long ignored. One fateful rainy evening, everything changed. James returned home to his modest apartment in the center of Manhattan and felt the cold penetrate every cell of his being. Through the cloudy glass of the window, he watched the street drown in lights. But in his soul, there was an emptiness that could no longer be hidden. Memories of how wonderful everything had once been began to torment him. He recalled the gentle looks and warm words of his wife, Emily, with whom they had dreamed of a future together. But in recent months, everything had changed. Conversations had become rare, and Emily's gaze had become distant and icy. Every gesture of hers, every delay in returning home spoke of a betrayal that James could not accept. Fragments of phrases, unspoken words began to sound in his head, and pain, like a knife, tore him apart from within. How could it happen that everything I loved turned out to be a lie? He thought, unable to believe in the betrayal that he had never suspected. Sitting at the table, James looked at his empty coffee mug, and in every reflection he saw images of happy days gone by. But now he felt like a stranger in his own life. The silence, broken only by the sound of rain on the glass, seemed like a mockery of fate. Thoughts raced, filling his mind with images of quarrels, cold separations, and betrayal. He tried to find a reason why the invisible cracks in their relationship could grow into a bottomless abyss. His heart screamed in pain, and his mind demanded an explanation. Why didn't I notice? Why did I let this happen? He asked himself questions, the answers to which seemed to be hidden forever. That night was a turning point in James's life. He made a decision that he felt would give him back his lost sense of control. He knew he could no longer live in the shadow of betrayal, that his soul needed to be cleansed through an understanding of his own weaknesses. Deciding that pain was not the end, but the beginning of a new path, James took up a diary for the first time to pour out all his experiences on paper. Each written line became a step toward self-knowledge, an attempt to restore what seemed to be an irretrievably lost harmony. He wrote about how every moment of loneliness, every word spoken with bitterness, threw him into the abyss of uncertainty and doubt. James knew the road to healing would be long and arduous. He felt he had to find the strength within himself to confront the pain that was slowly but surely destroying him from the inside. It was in this darkness that he began to see the first glimmers of light, a quiet but unquenchable spark of hope. His thoughts flowed from memories of past love to a determination to change his fate. He knew Emily's betrayal had left a deep mark, but he also believed that these wounds could be a source of new strength if he could only learn to embrace his pain and turn it into fuel for inner growth. At that moment, James realized that his crisis was not just the end of his old life, but an opportunity to be reborn. He felt the forces awakening inside him that could break the shackles of resentment and doubt. Taking a pen in hand, he wrote the first page of his new beginning, where every word reflected the struggle, the bitterness of loss, and the quiet determination to move on. That night became the starting point of his personal revolution, a revolution where every moment of suffering had meaning, and every tear was the seed of future healing. Thus began his journey to regain harmony and learn to live despite all the blows of fate. At dawn the next day, James walked out into the streets of New York, where the cool morning air felt like a breath of new life. Every step he took on the pavement echoed in his heart, reminding him of moments when he had felt alive. He made his way to a small cafe in Greenwich Village, where he believed he could find solace in simple conversations with strangers. There, amid the aroma of freshly roasted coffee and the sounds of early conversations, he met his old friend Michael. Over a cup of coffee, Michael listened intently as James recounted what had happened, his voice bitter and uncertain, but with a new determination in every word. "Pain," Michael said, "is not only a punishment, but also an opportunity to learn." The words resonated with James, reminding him that even in the darkest moments, there were glimmers of light. When he returned home, he sat down at his long, neglected desk and began writing in his journal. Each line, each sentence became a way for him to understand where this emptiness came from and how it could be filled with new meaning. He described every detail, from the cold nights when the rain pounded the windows to the melancholy thoughts that flitted through the silence of his room. The letter was his confession, his cry from the soul that he could no longer contain. With each passing day, his entries grew longer and his emotions deeper. He wrote about how Emily's betrayal had torn him apart from the inside, how the loss of trust had turned the familiar, cozy nest into a cage of loneliness. James painstakingly described every moment when he felt the world around him crumbling, when his wife's words, which had once seemed gentle, now sounded like accusations. He recalled how one day, sitting in the dark, he heard his own quiet voice asking, "Why couldn't I recognize these signs sooner?" These reflections filled his soul with pain, but at the same time made him search for an answer, for a way to overcome his inner crisis. Several weeks passed, and James became more and more lost in his thoughts. He began attending support groups where people who had experienced betrayal and loss shared their stories. In the company of such like-minded people, he felt that his pain was not unique, that in every heart wounded by life, there was a spark of hope. At one of the meetings, he heard the words of an elderly woman. "Every wound is a sign that we are alive, and if we learn to accept them, we can become stronger." These words became a mantra for James, which helped him in moments of despair. One day, during one of his long walks through the snowy streets of Manhattan, James met a stranger named Laura. Her gaze was soulful, and her voice was warm, as if she knew what it was like to feel alone in a huge world. They started talking on a park bench, where Laura told him about her losses, about how she had to fight the inner emptiness after a series of life failures. Her words, full of sincerity and wisdom, made James think, could a joint struggle with pain be the beginning of something new? Returning home, James began to reread the entries in his diary with excitement and slight anxiety. Each page revealed new facets of his own soul, helping him to understand that pain is not an enemy, but a guide to self-knowledge. He realized that he must learn to forgive not only Emily, but also himself for those moments when trust turned out to be blind. This thought, like a quiet call, began to break the ice in his heart. He realized that the crisis he was going through could become a source of strength if only he learned to accept his vulnerability and turn it into a desire for renewal. So, with each passing day, under the ringing of street lamps and the flickering lights of the big city, James began to feel a new rhythm of life being born in his soul. He no longer saw loneliness only as pain, but also as an opportunity to regain lost dreams, a chance to become stronger, wiser. His diary entries turned into a chronicle of an internal revolution, where each line was a step towards healing. And despite the bitterness of the past, he began to believe that even after the cruelest night, dawn comes, bringing the promise of a new day. Time, like a silent artist, continued to make changes in James's soul. There was no longer the previous feeling of complete emptiness. Instead, he felt a new understanding of life being born in his heart. Having decided that it was necessary to finally sort out the pain of the past, James arranged a meeting with Emily. This meeting was to become the culmination of his internal crisis, and the starting point for a new beginning. He chose a cozy cafe in the Soho area for the conversation, where the dim lights and quiet music created an atmosphere of privacy so necessary for a frank dialogue. When Emily appeared, her eyes were full of regret and confusion. She seemed to understand the depth of James's suffering, but her words were stuck on her tongue. James, suppressing the trembling in his voice, began the conversation. "Tell me, why did we reach this abyss? How could our love turn into a cold emptiness?" His words sounded sharp and relentless, as if he wanted to expel all the pain from himself and find answers to the questions tormenting his soul. Emily listened silently, and then began to speak softly, trying to justify her behavior, to explain that she felt forgotten and alone. But every word she said only deepened James's pain, returning him to those moments when trust was destroyed by lies. The dialogue grew increasingly tense. Between James's remarks and Emily's embarrassed justifications, there was an atmosphere of the inevitable clash of two worlds, a world where love was a sacred union, and a world where loneliness and resentment filled every corner of the soul. "I tried to love," he said, "but your coldness, your infidelity turned everything into an illusion from which there was no escape." There was not only resentment in his voice, but also a deep sadness for the lost dreams, for the time when they were happy together. Emily, barely holding back tears, tried to explain how her own pain forced her to seek solace in the arms of another, how she felt invisible in their life together. But James listened to her as if her words were tasteless echoes of an alien reality. After the meeting, James sat for a long time in the silence of his small office, turning over in his head every word, every pause left after the conversation. He understood that this meeting did not bring him comfort, but only exposed deep wounds that never healed. But at the same time, a determination was born in his soul not to remain a hostage of the past. He began to look through his diary entries again, finding in them not only suffering, but also valuable lessons that could become the foundation for a new I. Each page of the diary was filled with sincere experiences, and rereading them, he felt how trust in himself and the world gradually returned. James began to attend small gatherings of people who had faced similar trials, where he found support in the frank accounts of pain and loss. At one such gathering, an old man with a wrinkled face and wise eyes said, "Pain is not an enemy, but a teacher who shows us how alive we are." These words sank deep into his heart, making him think that every loss, every betrayal can be a step toward a new life if you learn to accept it. He realized that the truth of his crisis was not only Emily's betrayal, but that he had lived in an illusion for too long, not daring to face his own fears. From then on, James began to change his life. He began to look for joy in small things, in a morning walk along snowy streets, in quiet conversations with strangers, in the sounds of rain, which he now perceived as the music of change. He began to learn to love life again, realizing that even in the deepest darkness, you can find glimmers of light. His inner world, previously destroyed by betrayal, slowly began to transform, revealing new facets of strength and wisdom. At the end of his long and painful journey, James felt that he had finally reached a point where the pain of loss no longer defined him. New York, with its endless movement and bright lights, was no longer a place where he felt alone, but a symbol of endless possibilities for renewal. James realized that the crisis that once seemed insurmountable had become the very test through which he could get to know himself anew and discover strengths within himself that he had never suspected existed. He decided it was time to let go of the past and start living for himself. James once again plunged into the world of creative expression, writing, painting, participating in community events where he could share his experiences and help others find strength in difficult times. Every brushstroke, every word poured onto paper became symbols of liberation from the shackles of pain. He realized that true forgiveness begins with self-acceptance, with humility in the face of one's vulnerability, and this became the key to his inner rebirth. One spring evening, when the New York sky was a riot of colors, James held a small gathering of people who, like him, had gone through the trials of betrayal and loss. Gathered in an old art space, he read excerpts from his journal, telling how each moment of pain became a lesson, how each tear helped him find new strength. His voice, full of sincerity and confidence, filled the room, and the listeners, listening to his story, felt how slowly but surely their hearts were opening to a new life. At that moment, James finally understood that life is not an endless chain of suffering, but a series of moments in which even the deepest wounds can heal if you give yourself a chance to change. He looked into the eyes of those gathered, and in their reflection he saw not only his pain, but also the strength that helped him overcome it. Now he knew that Emily's betrayal was not the end, but the beginning of the path to true self-knowledge. His soul, having experienced a storm of emotions and deep inner emptiness, found harmony through the acceptance of all its facets. In those minutes, on the roof of a multi-story building, under the starry sky, James felt the past, like a heavy burden, retreat, giving way to lightness and freedom. He realized that every loss, every betrayal left an indelible mark. But these marks now served as a reminder that a person is capable of being reborn, no matter what. With every breath, he accepted a new life filled with light, creativity, and sincere love for himself. His internal crisis, which turned into a path to healing, became a source of strength, capable of transforming not only him, but also those around him. And so, under the flickering light of the street lamps and the noise of the big city, James Rogers took the final step on the road to renewal. He left behind all the shackles of pain, doubt, and loss to look with confidence to the future, where each new dawn promised the possibility of a new life. His story became a testimony to the fact that even in the most difficult trials, a spark of hope can be found that can light a light in the heart. And now, with a firm decision to move forward, he found the freedom he had sought for so long and forever, left behind the shadow of the past.